The Senate expected to be debating the Immigration and Border Security bill throughout the month of June. A quorum call on the Senate floor on this Friday morning as the senators wait for senators to come to the floor to speak. And during this break, we're going to show you some of the debate, some of the markup session from the Judiciary Committee from late last month.
Called the Hatch Amendment 10 and offer a secondary Hatch-Schumer amendment, which consolidates Hatch Amendments 10 through 17 and 20. Now, I know that this relates to Title IV, and you're working hard to keep us on track. This amendment establishes a coherent and constructive approach to high-skilled immigration. It will ensure that the H-1B and L-1 visa categories actually work. Some of the discussions of this subject that began last week appeared to cast high-skilled immigration in a negative light. I hope that that was not intentional, because America and American companies need more high-skilled immigrants. Unfortunately, the bill before us would impose fees, increase fines, and Labor Department scrutiny.
Senator, for some reason it's difficult to hear you. Could you
speak? Can't hear me? I'll get this closer. Unfortunately, the bill before us would I can't have it that close. Would impose fees, increase fines, and Labor Department scrutiny, and requires employers who are dependent on the H-1B workers to pay even entry-level workers at artificially high levels. Now, these and other elements of S-744 discourage rather than encourage the use of these visa categories to attract needed high-skilled workers. Our amendment strikes a better balance. It is consistent with basic requirements in the underlying bill, such as requiring every employer to advertise for every H-1B position, engage in good faith recruitment of U.S. workers, offer positions to any equally or better qualified U.S. worker, and attest that no U.S. worker has been or will be displaced by an H-1B worker. At the same time, my amendment makes these requirements workable in the real world. The bill prohibits a company from placing an L-1 worker at a third-party site unless it continues directly to supervise and control that worker. At the same time, the bill does not allow a U.S. company to place its own employee who it does supervise and control at a client location unless the client attests to its own hiring practices. This makes no sense. My amendment would ensure that the U.S. companies can continue to transfer specialized knowledge employees to the U.S. Second, my amendment makes the bill's recruitment requirement workable. The Labor Department, for example, should be able to review the hiring decisions of companies that do not have a track record of hiring Americans for jobs that are open to H-1B workers. But if a company does have a strong, proven track record, then it should not be subject to unnecessary Labor Department oversight. My amendment sets that sensible and reasonable balance. Third, the bill's non-displacement language does not require that an H-1B hire be related in any way to a U.S. worker layoff. That is too broad. It would prevent a company from hiring H-1B workers in the context of a corporate reorganization or reinvestment after, for example, closing a business line. That stifles innovation and prevents companies from making sound business decisions, from adapting and growing their businesses. Our amendment preserves the layoff attestation but focuses it where it belongs by prohibiting hiring an H-1B worker with the intent or purpose of replacing a U.S. worker. In fact, our amendment, applies this requirement to every single employer, public as well as private. In its current form, S-744 actually favors workers who are here illegally over high-skilled workers who would come here legally. Someone who snuck into the United States could get legal status, be hired, and work in a customer work site without bureaucratic rules or restrictions. But someone with the same skills from the same country who came here legally could not work here unless his employer paid an inflated salary and first offers the job to anyone the company guesses that the Labor Department would think is equally qualified. Stuart Anderson, a former Immigration and Naturalization Service policy chief, who also worked on this committee's staff, represented the National Foundation for American Policy in recent testimony before the Commerce Committee. He observed, quote, "While legalization is necessary to point out the irony as written, the bill would give an advantage to anyone who entered the country illegally over skilled foreign nationals who went to work in America in the future." I cannot believe that any of us intend that result. Finally, Mr. Chairman, our amendment is carefully tailored to make sure that the bill will provide robust protections for American workers. It will make it easier for foreign workers to change jobs or employers while waiting for their green card. It will reward companies that keep workers by paying them well and treating them with respect.
Sort of
I think that this approach to the high-skilled issue will allow us to support at least reporting this bill to the Senate floor. And it will allow me to support this bill to the Senate floor. As the authors of the underlying bill are well aware, I do have additional concerns that must be addressed before I can support this legislation on the floor. And I will be raising these concerns before the bill is reported. And those are my amendments 21 through 24, the Finance Committee amendments. And I particularly want to thank my friends and colleagues, Senator Schumer and Senator Durbin, for their hard work and cooperation on this amendment. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you again for allowing me to bring up this package of measures that has been developed by a broad array of industries and business coalitions, small businesses, manufacturers, and of course the tech industry, which continues to fuel so much innovation in our economy. And I hope that we'll all support this amendment because I believe that it makes this bill a much more acceptable bill.
Without objection.
Madam President, I want to insert in the record, with the permission of the chair, remarks other than the immigration bill about my fondness and respect for Senator Lautenberg, and also remarks on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of one of the largest universities in the nation, which happens to be University of Central Florida, located in Orlando. So with your permission, I would like those remarks inserted in the record.
Without objection.
Madam President, I would like to address the debate issue in front of the Senate. I want to thank the leadership that has been offered with the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, which his strong hand, his very firm but fair hand, has allowed the bill to be here, assisted by very able lieutenants on the Judiciary Committee, not the least of which is Senator Schumer of New York, who, as the subcommittee chairman, has been absolutely key. I also want to compliment my colleague from Florida, Senator Rubio. People in this highly partisan charged atmosphere say, how can a Democrat or Republican vice versa say good things about each other? And of course, I not only willingly do so, but do so at the drop of a hat to give credit where credit is due. And it's too bad that so much of the discussion is ideologically based on issues and is so partisan charged and tinged, looking for that slight little advantage in the next election, that we get to the point that we can't come together. Well, I think what we're going to see on display in the Senate over the course of the next several weeks is that the Senate can function, and it can function in a bipartisan way. And I give no small amount of credit to the bipartisan group of the Gang of Eight. They have arrived on the scene at the right place at the right time. Now, we've been trying, a number of us, in this chamber and previously when I was a member of the House of Representatives, going back to when I was a young congressman, trying to get comprehensive immigration reform. I voted on it in the 1980s. We actually passed a bill. It's instructive that there were less, at that time in the 80s, there were less than 3 million illegal aliens or undocumented, whatever you want to refer to it, in the country. And that attempt at immigration reform failed because there were not the safeguards to make sure that the law was followed, especially among employers, to make sure that the people that they were hiring was legal. And as a result, over the ensuing decades, the law wasn't followed. And what happened? The amount of undocumented in the country rose from less than 3 million in the 80s all the way to where it is now, about 11.5 million. So the time and the place has arisen to do something about it. It's too bad that it hasn't been done, but what's done is done. Now we have a chance to change that. Now, if you happen to come from a state like my beloved state of Florida that has such a rich mixture in the fabric of our society of so many different peoples from so many different parts of the world, then, of course, you ought to be a little more sensitive to the broken system that we have. And thus, it was not unusual that when it came time that suddenly a case exploded in the newspapers of a child, a dreamer, who had come here as a child with parents who were undocumented. The child never even knew that he or she was not American, and it gets down to the end of their graduation in high school and they want to go off to college or they want to go in the military, and lo and behold, they are now under the order of deportation. And of course, this senator, like many other senators, has had to try to intervene in these very egregious cases. I want to mention one, and it illustrates the ridiculousness of the present system that is so broken. A child brought at age 6 months from the Bahamas now grows up in America thinking he is American. He's a Floridian. He goes into the Army. Now, how he missed the checks there that he was undocumented, I don't know, but he goes into the Army. He serves 2 tours in Iraq. He has a top secret rating. When he comes back after the 2 tours, going into the private sector, he enlists in the Naval Reserves, and because of his top secret clearance, this particular now Navy reservist on active duty is sent to the very sensitive position, because of his top secret clearing, as a photographer at the Guantanamo detention facility of the detainees. And he serves that admirably. And somehow in the process after this, back in civilian life, this particular former Army, now Navy reservist, in applying for an application for a passport, answers something incorrectly on the passport application And because he doesn't know that he's not an American, and he gets arrested, and he's thrown in jail, and is in jail for going on 4 months until this senator finds out about this case, because I'm reading it in the newspaper. And of course, once we blew this up to the attention of the public at large, even the federal judge that is asking the prosecutor, why in the world are you prosecuting this case? That shows the ridiculousness of the existing law because it is so broken. Now, that, of course, had a good outcome. It didn't have a good outcome while somebody who had a top secret clearance is sitting in jail for over 3 months. But it's illustrative, again, of we've got to do something about the existing system. And thus we have in front of us today a compromise. Remember, the art of legislating is respecting the other fellow's point of view, reaching out, trying to bridge the differences with the goal that you want to achieve a result. Now, there are some here who don't want to achieve that result. And they're going to try to torpedo it. They're going to try to put poison pills that are so seductive as amendments that will kill the bill. They're going to make a lot of the senators on both sides of the aisle take tough votes on things that they would ordinarily support, but they're going to have to reject them to keep the integrity of the compromise in order, at the end of the day, to pass the immigration reform bill and then hope that we get a big enough vote here so that there's such a momentum and that all the different advocacy groups, including businesses, farmers, the immigration community, pro-immigration reform community, all of them start to lean heavily on the House of Representatives, and maybe at that point we can get the bill passed. And so as we consider this bill to fix this broken immigration system, many of us are going to disagree about details, but we've got to remember what is the goal at the end of the day. This bill includes important things to secure the borders. Do you think the borders are secure now? Well, by the way, they're a lot more secure now than they were just a few years ago. They're catching some 60% of all the people that are coming across the border now, but that's not good enough. 40% are still coming across. This bill is going to try to take it up to 90%. They're going to reform the visa program. They're going to make it easier at the end of the day because of the technology that we have where you can swipe the passport, that on some countries that desperately have wanted to get into a visa waiver, instead of having families come hundreds of miles to the consulate because of the information that's going to be contained on that passport, biometric information, we're going to be able to streamline that process. And certainly at the end of the day, we're going to be able to supply the workforce needs of the country if the employers will follow the law. And so now this reform bill is going to make it mandatory upon those employers to follow the law so that they can have a legal workforce instead of what is the case now. Don't look. I've got to have them for my business or my farm, my agriculture, whatever the business is. I've got to have them, but don't look because I know they're illegal. Well, that's going to be changed. And then there's another component. What about those people that came here on a legal visa, but now they've overstayed the visa? We're going to be able to check, because now with that biometric information, they're going to swipe as they leave the country that information so that it matches up with the information that we got when they came into the country on a legal visa, and now we're going to know who's staying behind. And by the way, those countries that want to be in the visa waiver program like Chile or like Brazil, and they've got to keep those defaults under 3% of the total visas, lo and behold, now those countries who want to keep the visa waiver to make it easier on their citizens to travel to the U.S., how about all those Brazilians that want to come to Disney World? Now they have an incentive to help their own people by keeping those defaults under 3% of the total visas for that country. And this reform of the visa program is very, very important. Now, what about the people that are here? Well, does anybody think that the solution to the problem is to deport 11 million people? You can't do that. But if you could, what would happen to this national economy? It would collapse. And so we're going to make a very lengthy path to getting a green card, of which they're going to have to pay fines, they're going to have to pay the taxes, they're going to have to learn English, and they're going to have to go to the end of the line. But they're going to be here legally so they can be employed, and they have to stay employed. You don't stay employed, you're out. And anybody who doesn't abide by all of that, presently we don't have a requirement that you've got to learn English. Now they're going to have to learn English. And so anybody who doesn't make all of those requirements is going to have to leave. And so I have just scratched the surface of the bill. But I think you can see that it is a good faith attempt to bring together all of the interests using a little common sense to try to reform what is a broken system. And I hope we will get a huge vote out of the Senate. I hope this vote exceeds 3/4 of the Senate. And that will send a real message to the House. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam Chair,
Senator from Alabama.
I would ask the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, as we begin to discuss this legislation, the immigration bill that's before us, a lot of people haven't realized it's coming up. A lot of people don't realize the breadth of it. A lot of people are concerned about it. We've gotten a lot of phone calls in my office. People wonder who's speaking up about the bill, and they want to know what's in the bill. And so I think that's a big part of what
we should be doing in the days to come. Going over the bill in a careful way concerning the any progress that the bill makes and any deficiencies that the legislation has. As I noted previously, the fundamental challenge that we must recognize based on the way Congress works and the difficulty it has had with these issues over the last number of years. That is, we have to be sure that once the amnesty is granted, that there is enforcement in the future. And so in 1986, that bill, as Senator Grassley has so passionately delineated, he voted for it. Amnesty was given, 3 million people, but the enforcement never occurred, and now we have 11 million people here illegally. And this cannot happen again. If we allow this to happen again, we will have eviscerated any ability that we have to ask people to comply with the law, because people who don't comply with the law aren't held to account. And there's nothing wrong with saying that a person can come to America under certain conditions for certain periods of time, and then they must leave. And if they don't leave and they're apprehended, they should be deported. Well, we're at a condition today where nobody is being deported. If you ask your law officers in whatever city and county you're in, and this has been going on since before President Obama took office, you ask them what happens if they catch somebody that was speeding in their town in Alabama or Indiana or Colorado, and they discover they're here illegally. What happens? Isn't this a fundamental question? Well, what happens is they turn them loose. You ask them, your law officers, because nobody will come and get them. The federal government is reached a point now where virtually no one is being deported, except those convicted of serious crimes. And it's led to the ICE union, the Immigration Customs Enforcement officers who deal with deportations and arrests. These officers voting no confidence in the head of the ICE department, Joe Martin, the head man, John Martin. No confidence. I've never heard of that. Then in addition, they have opposed this bill. They said it makes things worse. It will increase the likelihood, it will diminish America's national security, and it will make the bill better. So have the association, the Union for Customs Citizenship and Immigration Service, that deals with the visas and deals with the citizenship processing and all of that. They've opposed the bill, saying it would make the situation worse than present law, which is completely not being enforced today. So that's what we're wrestling with here overall. And I know the American people need to get alert to this. So we've been told by the supporters of the legislation, don't worry, we're going to have the toughest enforcement legislation in history. Senator Schumer said tough as nails, the toughest ever. Well, it's not in the bill. So what happened in '87 was once the amnesty was given, everybody forgot in the future to worry about enforcement. And enforcement just didn't happen. And it's going to happen again. That is exactly what's going to happen again. So the people that are concerned about the legislation, objecting to this legislation, are not against immigration. We allow 1 million people to come in the country legally every year, more than any other country in the world. So we're not trying to stop that. What we're trying to say is that you need a good future flow for immigration, and you need to be sure it's enforceable. More people want to come to this great land than can come here. I don't blame them for wanting to come here. And if somebody convinces them that America really the American people or the American government doesn't care if they come illegally and stay here, and eventually they'll be given citizenship. Why shouldn't they come illegally? So we have to have a national consensus that as we treat compassionately people who've been here a long time and been good people, and we try to be generous there, that we don't create further flow of illegal immigration, as we've been warned will happen by governmental experts, and that we tighten up the enforcement mechanisms that are so clearly broken today. So that's the fundamental principle of what we are about. Now, I'm going to mention some of that now, and we'll talk about more of those problems in the future. But the whole fundamental principle that we need to create a lawful system of immigration that works in the future as well as today. And our sponsors, the Gang of Eight, have said that's what they have. They have told us their bill does that. They say our bill will end the illegality at the border. They say they're going to have a strong enforcement on visa violations, which is really not true. And they say they've got guaranteed enforcement at the workplace. And that one has some benefits, but the way they've done it is it delays it longer than it should be, and it creates some dangers there. But a good workplace enforcement would be a step forward. And then they claim that they've got mechanisms to lead to removal of dangerous people from the country, all of which I have to say is fundamentally not accurate. So they acknowledge what needs to be done. So the members of the Senate, the members of the Congress, and the American people, they need to be asking, does this bill do what has been promised for it? And if it does, we may be on the track to doing something good. But if it doesn't, it needs to be rejected. We cannot go down the path of amnesty now and another massive illegality in the future. Cannot do that. We've got to do the right thing. And isn't that the right thing? Our sponsors of the bill say it is. They promise this is going to be tough as nails, the toughest bill ever. Well, I can tell you with absolute confidence it's not as strong as the bill in 2007 that was voted down and rejected. It's weaker than that. It's weaker than current law in so many important areas. You say, well, you can say that, Jeff. It's not true. It is true. Fundamentally, we will show that the legislation is not where it needs to be. Even Senator Rubio is saying he won't vote for the bill itself. He's one of the Gang of Eight that wrote it, but he sees enough loopholes that he wouldn't have voted for it now. And it has to be reformed. It absolutely has to be reformed. There is no doubt about that. But the problem is, except for Senator Rubio, I guess, the Gang of Eight agreed to stick together and have no real amendments passed. And they did that in the committee. We had a committee process. We had a lot of amendments offered. They just stuck together and voted down all the amendments, any of them that were significant. A lot of smaller amendments were passed. And, but, you know, Senator Schumer apparently said, well, did the Republicans have a pass on this vote? That means did the Republican Gang of Eight members, were they allowed to vote their conscience, or were they still committed to voting like the Gang of Eight signed in blood to vote? So they gave them a pass on a few votes. So this is not a way to do the public business. It's just not. Madam Chair, one thing I do believe is important for us to understand. I've been wrestling with the issue for a long time. I've been a federal prosecutor. I would tell you that we can make the system work. A lot of people think it's just hopeless, that you could not make the system work. Not so. We made some progress at the border, and if we had real strong leadership, really effective in identifying where the gaps are and moving resources and stepping up our fencing and our equipment, we could see real progress at the border, real progress. And a lot of it is mathematics, I'd say, from my law enforcement experience. If you add more police officers and crime rate going down, then you got more police officers per criminal, per crime, and you got a more ability to drive down in a virtuous cycle. So we added, after 2007, a number of Border Patrol officers. President Obama claims credit for it, but he didn't have credit. It happened before he took office. They were hiring into his term, I'm sure, but it was passed before he took office. So we got more people there, and we can have fewer illegal immigrants for a whole lot of reasons, and then you got more officers per illegal immigrant, and you can do better. So you can do better at the border. Secondly, biometric entry-exit visas been required by 6 different pieces of congressional legislation. It was recommended by the 9/11 Commission. When people come into the country, they have a fingerprint and they are admitted into the country. What we're not doing is verifying they ever leave the country. And we know most of the 9/11 attackers came on a visa. So people don't know if they're legally or overstaying or ever left. And it's easy. So they say it's going to cost billions of dollars, $25 billion to do this, one of our Gang of 8 said in the committee. It's not going to cost $25 billion. We discovered in 2009, I believe, a report issued by the Department of Homeland Security, and that report discovered that you could easily identify people when they depart the country. You go into the terminal, one of the complaints were we've got to build all these new buildings and structures and so forth. But when you leave, all you have to do is put your finger on a fingerprint recording machine and it reads your fingerprint. And it identifies you. And what they found was in Atlanta, when they were doing this, like 20,000 or so many, 25,000, I believe, were exiting. Over 100 were hit on the watch list. Some of them had felony warrants out. Some of them were on the terrorist list. It's a large number, and it didn't cost much money. It's not hard to do. So that could be done. And we can absolutely make the workplace secure by using an E-Verify system at all employment places. That's the key to that. So there are things, if we do those things fundamentally, we can make the system work. Unfortunately, the promises made in this legislation don't do it. What the American what would happen under this bill is that Secretary Napolitano, after the enforcement officially stops, must give 2 reports to Congress within 6 months. 2 reports, not do anything. 2 reports, and then all the people here illegally will be given a provisional status, legal status, a Social Security card, the ability to work. So no real action has to occur at the border or any place else. And that's the fundamental flaw, and we've got to deal with that. What the American people are saying is, first deal with the illegality, and then let's talk about how to be compassionate for people who've been here for a long time. But the more troubling issue that's not been fully discussed, the other half of the immigration equation, is interior enforcement. This bill further weakens an already decimated interior enforcement system. Immigration reform will never work This bill will never work unless the United States Immigration and Customs officers are given the resources and the authority they need to do their jobs. It will not work. And their morale has plummeted because their leadership is blocking them from enforcing plain law. They have virtually the lowest morale rating of any agency in government. Over a year ago, I asked Secretary Napolitano, was she not concerned about it? Would she meet with the ICE agents and determine what the problem was? So I came back this year and I asked her, had she met with them? No. They voted no confidence in that supervisor, John Morton, and they have written us a long letter detailing the failures in this bill, saying it will make it worse than current law and will leave this country more insecure than we were. It's really a remarkable thing. But they have got to be allowed to be a part of the game. It cannot be the policy of the United States of America, if someone gets into the country illegally, that they're home free. If they get past the Border Patrol at the border, nobody will ever deport them. That's what we're doing now. Unless they're convicted of a serious felony, nobody is being deported. So you say, well, all the people have been here a long time. We don't want to start deporting people. We're about to give them amnesty. So that's the... But the bill is, if passed, assumes everybody's been given amnesty. The bill assumes that everybody has been given permanent legal status, or legal status, basically a guaranteed permanent status in the country. They'll be given a Social Security card, identification, right to work anywhere. So what about people who come illegally after that? Are we not ever going to enforce the law again? If other people come illegally, overstay visas, come through the border, stow away on ships, we've got to know that it's going to be fixed. And it cannot be that if somebody gets past the border, nobody will ever apprehend them and make them be deported, because they shouldn't be here. You're just not entitled to come to America illegally and then protest when you're apprehended. Oh, no, I have a right to be here. I've been here for 18 months. You cannot deport me. Once this amnesty occurs, we've got to know that we have the mechanism in place to do the job that immigration enforcement at a minimum requires. I think that's so important. Chris Crane, the president of the ICE Officers Union and an ICE officer himself, a former Marine, explained the situation in his testimony before the House of Representatives recently. Quote, agents report that if they encounter suspected illegal aliens in public, now I'm talking about federal agents, ICE agents, immigration agents, quote, they cannot arrest them. The day-to-day duties of ICE agents and officers often seem in conflict with the law, as ICE officers are prohibited from enforcing many laws enacted by Congress, laws they took an oath to enforce. ICE is now guided in large part by influences of powerful special interest groups that advocate on behalf of illegal aliens. Close quote. Does that not cause any concern here? We've got to deal with this. We've got to get our ICE people off the mat and into the game. He also testified, quote, morale is at an all-time low as criminal aliens are released to the streets. Criminal aliens, he's not talking about people who violated the immigration law. He's talking about aliens who committed crimes like drugs and assault. Criminal aliens are released to the streets, and ICE instead takes disciplinary, he's talking about his supervisors, takes disciplinary action against its own officers for making lawful arrests. It appears clear that the federal law enforcement officers are the enemy and not those who break the nation's laws, close quote. So he's saying the supervisors are punishing the ICE officers who actually go out and arrest people because they've set a policy not to enforce the law of the United States. People may not think that's true, but it is absolutely a fact that we have basically made it impossible to enforce the law, and that comes from Secretary Napolitano right on down. And that's why she doesn't want to meet with them, because she doesn't have an answer. Because she's telling them, and her deputy is telling them not to enforce the law. Mr. Crane further testified, quote, "If an alien is arrested by local police, by your local police officer, and placed in jail, again, ICE agents may not arrest them for illegal entry or visa overstay. New policies require that illegal aliens have a felony arrest or conviction or be convicted of 3 or more misdemeanors. So many illegal aliens with criminal convictions are also now untouchable," close quote. And that's the reality of law enforcement in this country. It's just very, very serious, and it's a sad state of affairs, no doubt about it. And were these officers consulted when the Gang of 8 wrote the bill? They tell us they've got a bill that's going to work to end lawlessness in America in the future, but did they ever consult with the people who are out there trying to enforce the law now to get their ideas about how to make the system work better in the future? And do they have new provisions in the bill that give our ICE agents and Border Patrol agents and citizen and immigration officers more authority to do their job? No. So the bill gives actually more discretion to the Secretary to eviscerate enforcement by not having to enforce plain law. There are a number of provisions in the code that says if somebody is arrested and they have due to be deported, it says they shall be deported. That's the law. Well, they're just not doing that. Well, I don't think this is, frankly, just loophole or failure of attention. I don't think the Gang of 8 was really on top of all the details of the legislation. I think they spent most of their time consulting with Mr. Trumpka at the AFL-CIO and Mr. Donahue at the Chamber of Commerce and La Raza and the Immigration Lawyers Association and the meat packers and the grocery folks or the big agribusinesses. That's who they've been talking with, the computer gurus demanding more and more. And so they didn't focus on this. But the people who were actually in there writing it, the immigration lawyers, the Chamber of Commerce, the union lawyers and all that have been working on this bill, they knew what they were doing. And so these scribes, these drafters of the legislation, I believe, fully understood what it meant. Under this bill, amnesty will occur at once, just like it did in 1987. And like then, we get a mere promise of enforcement in the future, a mere promise. But far from making our laws tougher, as the Gang of 8 has promised, and as we need to do, the enforcement of laws are greatly weakened in a whole number of significant areas. Ladies and gentlemen, the drafters of the bill will have gotten what they want. They will have gotten amnesty for the 11 million. They will get a dramatic increase in the flow of workers and low-skilled workers into America. That's what they want. They're not interested in future enforcement. And in fact, many of them felt like that big increases in immigration in the future weren't enough. So they have no objection to illegal immigration, it seems, or they would have put a lot more attention in drafting a legislation that would improve the illegal system. So this bill fails, and we'll go into more detail about it as time goes by, but this bill fails as a matter of law enforcement. And that's going to be clear. Now, I'm looking at a new piece of legislation introduced by Trey Gowdy, who is the chairman of the House subcommittee He's a former prosecutor, federal prosecutor, 6 years, assistant United States attorney, a real prosecutor who understands how the system works. And Mr. Gowdy's put together a good bill. He says this, quote, robust internal immigration enforcement. That is what the ICE agents do in Denver and in Memphis and in Indianapolis. Robust internal immigration enforcement paired with border security is our safeguard against repeating the mistakes of 1986. His bill, called the SAFE Act, is a critical step in our efforts to fix our broken immigration system and ensures we will not be having this conversation again in 10, 20, or 30 years. Ensures, close quote, ensures that we won't be back here with another amnesty demand because we've enforced the law. And he's put together some good principles that are not in this bill. First, it grants states and localities the authority to help enforce immigration laws. Supreme Court says you can't do that, it's unconstitutional. Not so. Supreme Court says the U.S. Congress, by the way it passed its legislation, preempted local enforcement in a lot of areas, and they couldn't participate because, and when Attorney General Holder tells the federal agents not to enforce the laws, state people can't enforce them either, basically. So Attorney General Holder says that we're not enforcing these laws. Secretary Napolitano, we're not enforcing these laws. And then the state can't do it because it's totally preempted essentially by the federal government, except for peripheral areas like a business can't get a business license if they knowingly hire illegal workers. That can probably be a state thing. Well, it's just a matter of Congress's action, so Mr. Gowdy would explicitly allow help from state and local officers. Now, let's get this straight. If a police officer in Alabama arrests somebody in the country illegally, they cannot prosecute them. They can only hold them for a short period of time. All they can do is turn them over to federal officials. Now, that's clear. Mr. Gowdy doesn't change that, really. But the fundamental thing, they could do that, but that's the way the system works. So what we need to be thinking about is, don't we have to have local law enforcement to be participants in any system that guarantees legality? There are 600,000 state and local law enforcement officers. There are 5,000 interior federal immigration officers, 5,000 ICE officers, and many of them have other duties. So it's our local police and sheriffs that are out on the highways and state troopers that are out there every day coming in touch with thousands of people, and they are the ones that identify people here illegally. When the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security rejected agreements with state and federal officers to have their assistance in identifying people here, they knew what they were doing. They were effectively eliminating the identification of many of the people here illegally. That was a deliberate, calculated act, and people need to know it. And it was wrong. It was wrong. So a good system of immigration for America in the future, remember now, we're talking about after people have been given amnesty under this bill, the bill should then welcome and the assistance of state and federal officers and make up policies that help with that. The Gowdy bill would protect American communities from dangerous criminals by facilitating and expediting the removal of criminal aliens. This has been delayed. It's not working effectively. It's costing us a lot of money. If someone is here illegally, they're convicted of a felony, they ought to be removed and ought not to be a big deal about it. I mean, how much trouble is that? So his bill would speed that up and make the system work better. It improves visa security. It helps the ICE agents do a better job It assists the ICE officers in carrying out their jobs by enforcing federal immigration laws, by allowing them to make arrests. They're basically being prohibited from making arrests today. Can you believe it? For federal felonies and federal criminal offenses, and for bringing in and harboring unlawful aliens. The officers need to be able to enforce those laws. It strengthens border security in a number of ways. It reviews the prosecutorial authority that's basically directed not to follow the law and not to enforce the law that's out there. It strengthens national security in quite a number of ways. Well, this is a good piece of legislation. He knew what he was doing. He drafted something that will make a difference, really would make the bill stronger. So I asked my colleagues, why wouldn't you put something like that in the legislation? You say you want to have a tough bill. You say your bill is tough. So this will be called to the attention of the bill sponsors. We'll ask for legislation like this to be passed as an amendment to this bill, and we'll see if it passes. If it doesn't pass, then we can draw a conclusion that the sponsors of the bill and the people that are promoting the bill don't really want to see the law enforced better in the future than it is today. And that would be a sad admission, it seems to me. To wrap up, this is a great institution, the United States Senate. I'm glad that Senator Reid acquiesced in my insistence and at least have the opportunity to begin our discussion today. It's just the beginning. We will begin to talk about the legislation, talk about how to make our system work better, talk about the American people's desire, good and decent people that they are, to be compassionate to people who've been here a long time, but their insistence that in the process we create a lawful system of immigration in the future so we're not back here again. And as I indicated earlier, a poll showed that 88% of the people said they're angry with their elected officials about failure to enforce the law, whereas only 12% said they were angry at people who entered the country illegally. And the American people are willing to create a legal status for people who've come here illegally. But we need to do it in a way that works. And they're demanding that we create a system of lawfulness that will work. We can do it. It's absolutely possible. That will be demonstrated as we go forward. And we're going to have to change this bill, however, and put some teeth in it and give some real power to our dedicated law officers whose lives are at risk every day out there on the streets, to give them the backing and the mechanisms in law that allow them to be effective. And if we do it right, Madam President, the whole world will say, uh-oh, the United States has gotten their act together. The United States is serious about their immigration system being lawful. And if you try to enter, they're liable to catch you. If you try to enter, you won't be able to get a job illegally. And if you enter and get past the border and hide out in Minneapolis and you get caught, you're going to be deported. So don't try to come illegally. Apply to come legally. And we could see a dramatic drop in the attempts to enter illegally if we do that. And that's what a system of integrity requires. First, people need to know you shouldn't do it. The United States will enforce its law, and if you come into the country illegally, you will be deported. I thank the Chair. Would note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.